Welcome, everybody. My name is Marty Gahbauer. You are here to hear a workshop on informational interviewing. So hopefully you are in the right spot. This is in the third in our series of navigating the job search, the transition. So again, my name is Marty Gahbauer, and currently I work at Elmhurst University. And I am here today, as I mentioned, to talk to you about informational interviewing. And how I come to talk to you about that is I was in a career in advertising for a number of years and decided I wanted to make a transition into another industry. Really didn't know what that industry would be. So over the course of 14 months, I actually went out and conducted 125 informational interviews to help me figure out what that next step for me could be. And for me, that was higher ed, and that's where I ended up. I worked at another institution, Loyola University Chicago, prior to Elmhurst University. But that's where I ended up landing, and it was all through actually the help of the tool that I'm about to walk you through. And as Lanai was mentioning, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And then the other thing before I start, I wanted to ask a quick question. And if for those of you who may or may not be familiar with Zoom, there's a little reaction button in the lower right-hand corner. And if you can click on that, and just by a show of hands, you'll see you can raise your hand in there. How many folks actually know about informational interviewing? So if you could click on that, that would be helpful. Great, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up and hands raised, wonderful. Okay, so how many of you, if you can put those all down again, how many of you have done them in the past? Okay, great. We have some folks who have done it. Okay, how many folks out there would consider themselves a pro at doing informational interviews? Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you. I am going to cover a number of different topics. So hopefully, when you're done with this, you will feel like you know a lot more about the topic. Hopefully everybody can see this. Again, if somebody can just give me a thumbs up that they can see it, that I'm sharing my screen correctly, that would be helpful. I think I'm doing okay. All right. So what I will do now is just walk through the presentation. As I mentioned, this is about mastering the art of informational interviewing. There's a reason, thank you, thanks Judy. There's a reason why I call it the art of informational interviewing is everybody has their own sense of style as they conduct these and approach the way they do them, which is all okay. What I'm here about is to tell you about what worked for me, process that worked for me. Hopefully you can take this information and move forward with it. The information, the presentation I'm about to go through is available online. As I mentioned, they're going to be recording this, so you can certainly watch it again there, but it's also on something called prezi.com. You can access it 24/7. And I know that Mike will also be sending along some handouts for this presentation as well, and I reference where the presentation there is, so you can check it out later. All right, so I'm going to dive right into the topic, and again, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and Mike will jump in. So again, the key to a job search, an effective job search, is networking. Networking is all about getting your name out there, hopefully getting a contact name at a target company or an industry that you're interested in. That's where informational interviewing can come into play. It's a wonderful and it's a flexible tool that you can use in your transition. So if you're looking for a job, but also after you have a job, if you're in a company and you want to perhaps move into a different area, informational interviewing is a great way to learn about that area. So informational interviewing. I'm going to start off with, conversely, with what it is not, because so many people seem to confuse this. What informational interviewing is not, is it is not a job interview. You are not asking individuals for a job in your informational interview. There is no quicker way to kill an informational interview by treating it like a job interview. So what you want to make sure that you do is leave your resume either in your briefcase or at home. You do not want to lead with a resume in an informational interview. The reason being is when you do that, you're signifying to that individual that you asked them for an informational interview, but really what you're asking them for is a job. And that's basically doing a bait and switch, right? You don't want to do that. So if that's what informational interviewing isn't, what is informational interviewing? Informational interviewing is an informal yet highly focused discussion with a networking contact for the sole purpose of gaining information or knowledge. Again, it's right there in the headline, informational interviewing. That's what it is. So, and having gone through a job search myself, I know that if, folks will say, well, if it's not about asking for a job, then why should I spend my time in a job search doing it? Well, there are a number of reasons and benefits for doing informational interviewing. First and foremost, you can learn about the skills and abilities needed to succeed in a position or company, right? An important thing to find out is, if you're interested in a job, well, what do I need to do the job and do the job well? That will vary actually by position, and even if it's the same position, if it's at a different company, it might be a little bit different. So you're going to need to learn about what skills or abilities are needed to be successful in that job. That's important because then you can begin to assess, do I have those skills or abilities to be successful, or don't I? And however you answer that question is okay. But that's a great benefit of doing informational interviewing. The other is identifying culture and fit potential. What do I mean by that? That basically means I feel like this culture of this company or this organization is well suited to myself, well suited to the values that I have. I'm actually a great believer in culture and fit potential. I think it's actually the #1 determinant if you are going to be successful in your new position at a new company. And the logic flow to me is really simple. If there's a strong fit, you will feel comfortable. If you feel comfortable, you are most likely doing your best work. If you're doing your best work, you're most likely to be successful. Again, and the thing about culture and fit potential, those are things that are really, really difficult to get at in a traditional job interview. But in an informational interview, you can ask all the questions that you need to divine what that culture is at that company or not. You can brush up on your interviewing skills. That one's probably a little self-explanatory because in informational interview, you're going to be asking questions. People are going to be asking you questions. You're going to be answering questions. So a lot of the same skill set that you need to be successful in a traditional job interview. And you can brush up on those in doing an informational interview. The other thing is you can generate contacts. And if you're doing an informational interview correctly, you will be generating additional contacts. That's important because, as I said right from the beginning of this workshop, is networking is extremely important for a successful job search. So by doing informational interviewing, you can generate additional networking contacts to continue on your path of networking that will hopefully lead to your next position. You can increase your visibility. What do I mean by that? Well, as I mentioned, I had a career in advertising and now I'm in higher education. Both of those industries, those worlds are actually very small communities. People in the advertising community, or a lot of them knew one another. The same thing with higher ed. And by doing informational interviewing in a given industry or sector in an area, the more you do them, the more you start to become known, because people will talk with one another. They will say, yes, I just recently spoke with Marty at an informational interview. And it's funny that you bring that up. We actually are currently looking for a position to be filled. He may be a good candidate. Again, it's a great opportunity to increase your visibility. And the other thing I like to say about this is, you know, we live in the Chicagoland area. One of the great Chicagoisms is don't send me nobody knows. And the statement of visibility is all about that, right? People like to have individuals recommended to them from people that they trust. So again, you can increase your visibility, a great benefit. You can discover an area or a field you never knew about. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you an example of myself. As I mentioned, I did a number of informational interviews, and the more I started learning about the area of, or the industry of higher ed, I learned about the area of career services, which I really didn't know much about at all before I started doing these informational interviews. And the more I did them, the more I thought, you know what, this could be a really good fit for me and for my background and my skill set, etc. And again, I learned about it primarily through informational interviewing. So again, a great benefit. You can stumble across a hidden job market. I know you're probably saying, Marty, I thought you said this isn't about asking for a job. And I'm not saying that actually, but over the course of an informational interview, you may learn that a position has just opened up in a given company that you're interested in, and you learned about it through informational interviewing. That happened to me. I had a really nice informational interview with an individual who sent me an email, several months after my informational interview and asked if I was still looking for a position. And because the president of his institution had left for another institution and they were looking for somebody with a marketing advertising background. And he asked if it would be okay if he forwarded my resume, which I was like, of course, yes, please do. And that actually led to an opportunity to interview for that position. Now, I didn't get that job, but again, that I got to talk and interview for that position even before it was posted. So again, that's a nice sort of hidden benefit of informational interviewing. And here is an important distinction again between a traditional job interview and an informational interview. The genesis of this presentation that I'm walking you through came out of an accountability group that I belonged to during my transition. And one of the individuals, an introvert, actually asked me to put something together because she was intimidated by the thought of doing informational interviews. And for those of you that are out there today that are introverts, you may be feeling that same way. Kind of intimidating, reaching out to individuals who you don't know and asking them for time to spend with you in an informational interview. What I'm about to share with you, was really helpful to her, and it's a trait of introverts actually. When she heard that, unlike a job interview, in an informational interview, you as the person are the person who's in control, right? And You are the person that's reaching out to the individuals to ask them for an informational interview. You go in prepared with your questions, you're doing the follow-up, you are in control, which is very different than a traditional job interview, right? A traditional job interview, all the power really sits on the other side of the desk, right? By the person who is the interviewer. And that really helped her become more comfortable in feeling like being able to reach out, because she felt like, I get it, I'm in control. So I mentioned that informational interview as a tool, job search tool, is also very flexible. What do I mean by that? Well, you can use it really at all different phases in your job search. So I break it out. I've categorized a job search really into three areas. So phase one, that's what I call exploring opportunities. When, like for me, for instance, when I was interested in learning more about higher education, but didn't really know anything about it, that would be considered phase one, exploring what my opportunities would be in that industry. And who can I talk to during that phase? Really anybody who's in that industry. Why? Because they can tell you whatever their general knowledge of the industry is, and you can start to ascertain, yeah, this is a right industry for me or not. So that's phase one. Phase two is what I call the clarification and validation phase. So that's when, let's say, again, to continue using that example, I decided, you know what? Higher ed is a good industry for me, and specifically, I'm thinking career services could be a good fit, a good place for me within the broad area of higher education. But I need to figure out if that's true or not. I need to validate or clarify that it is indeed the case. Who do I talk to at that point? Those are the people that are doing the job that you think you want to do, right? The people at that position level that you think you want to do, because they can tell you, again, what are the skills and abilities needed to be successful in that area. So that's phase two. The third and final phase is what I call the strategic prospecting stage. Now, let's say you figured out higher ed is where you want to be, and more specifically, you're interested in a position within career services. Now, what do? That's what I call strategic prospecting. That's when you're trying to talk to those individuals who actually will be doing the hiring for those positions, right? So those people, the people that you want to target at this point to do an informational interview with, are those people generally 1 or 2 levels higher than the position that you're interested in obtaining. How you conduct an informational interview in this phase is a little different from phase 1 and 2, and I'll get into that in a moment later in the presentation. But again, it's a flexible tool that you can utilize throughout the arc of your job search. So, how do you get an informational interview? What I'm going to share with you is a process that worked for me. And again, I titled this The Art of Informational Interviewing. You can take this then and use it as you best see fit. But this is the process that worked for me. What I ended up doing was I would send a request via email or later on in my search through LinkedIn. And I say later on, when I was in transition, it was actually my dates of transition matched up almost exactly with the dates of the Great Recession. And LinkedIn as a tool, when I first started my search, was actually nascent. It was brand new. At the end of that time period of 14 months, it actually became a tool that was becoming effective to ask for informational interviews. Again, it's a wonderful networking tool, highly recommended. So what I did was sent a request, again, either via email or LinkedIn to a networking contact that I got. I followed up with a phone call. Again, you're in charge and in control of the situation. And then I would try and settle on what date we could hold the interview, then made sure I sent a follow-up thank you note, and then update them on progress along the way. So that was the basic process that I used. In terms of the request that I sent out, I'll talk this through, and it varies a little bit if you're on LinkedIn, but I think the principles remain the same. So in the email request that I would send out, what I ended up doing was in the first paragraph, I would mention how I got their name. Maybe Susan pass along the name, and I'm reaching now out to them to conduct an informational interview. The second paragraph then provided them a background about myself. That paragraph is really, really important because it establishes my credibility, right? That's really important because you need them to be able to say yes to you for an informational interview, and they won't say yes just to anybody, right? They need to feel like they will be spending their time and wisdom with an individual that they feel comfortable with doing that. And that can only be done by establishing your credibility. So that second paragraph is really important. And then the third paragraph was all about the ask, asking them for a brief informational interview. And a little tip I can pass along is I always ask for 20 minutes, knowing that people don't schedule their calendars in 20-minute increments. They typically schedule it in 30-minute increments. So at the very least, I knew I would probably get 30 minutes by asking for 20, and usually would get even more than that. But just a little tip of the trade. And then, of course, thank them in advance for considering. So that's roughly the structure of the outreach that I did for asking for an informational interview. And I have an example here. It's probably tough to read, but this will be in the handouts that Mike sends along to you. And one thing you should know is that I'm a little old school. I crafted a lot of my outreach in Microsoft Word and did so in the format of a traditional business letter. Actually, the first several requests I sent out for informational interviews, I actually did send out through the mail, and they were not successful. And I quickly learned that that's not the right approach, that email and then later LinkedIn is the way you want to do this. In any case, the structure here from this email, you'll see, follows what I just mentioned. So I mentioned right up front how I got the person's name, right? This was going to the director of a career center at my alma mater at University of Illinois, and basically said, as the director of the career center, your time is extremely valuable, so I'll keep this brief. The director of a career center down at the University of Texas at Austin actually gave me this person's name. So it starts to show you how broad your reach gets when you do these informational interviews. Anyways, I mentioned that's how I got this person's name, who could hopefully prove as a helpful contact as I manage my career transition. The second paragraph, I go into a bit about my background. And one thing I would say is this paragraph's way too long. I would never recommend doing anything this long in an email anymore, because people are very time pressed. They don't have the time to go through that. You should probably make it 2, maybe 3 sentences long, short as possible. The important thing to remember is that it achieves the objective of establishing your credibility. So that's important to remember. And then the final paragraph, I should say, was the ask, which was, as the next step in my career, I'm passionately interested in applying my talents in the higher education arena. specifically in career services. In pursuit of that goal, I'd like to ask for 20 minutes of your time to gain your perspective. I will call your office next week to arrange a time for a brief informational interview. Thank you in advance. And again, you'll note that I said I will call your office. So again, I'm being proactive. I'm in charge of the process. Something that's really important to remember. So let's see. Next, let me move on. I need to sort of scroll out of this. There you go. So you sent out your request for an informational interview. So hopefully they will have said yes. So how do you conduct an informational interview? Number one, be prepared. As I mentioned, you are in charge of this, so please have your questions ready to go, scripted if need be. And you'll note in the handouts that I passed along, I have an example in there of one gentleman who liked to have an agenda that he could hand off to his informational interviewees. Basically, where he had all of his questions already laid out. That's not my approach. My approach was basically I wrote down my questions, had a little pad folio with me so I could make sure that I asked the questions that I needed to ask. However you want to do it, just know that be prepared and have your questions ready to go. Be professional, dress appropriately and be on time. You can never, you never want to miss a time, or if that happens, that for whatever reason, you are going to be late or miss, please, use your phone, call ahead, just say, I'm so sorry, I'm stuck in a traffic jam. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to make it. Hopefully we can reschedule. Really, really important. You want to conduct yourself professionally at all times. Be a good listener, right? If it's all about gaining information and learning, then the way you do that is by listening, right? Ask your questions and listen to what they say to you, and don't be afraid to take notes. As I mentioned, always had my pad folio. I always asked if it was okay to take notes. They invariably always said yes. So, just be a good listener and make sure that you're learning along the way. After all, it's all about gaining information. Be a harvester. What do I mean by that? If you're doing your informational interviews correctly, you will be walking out of the informational interview with at least one additional contact name so that you can continue on your networking and your job search. So that's really an important aspect of doing informational interviews. Be courteous. Again, you can never thank them enough for taking time out of their day, right? Time is such a valuable commodity, probably even more so now than it ever was. So again, you want to make sure that you're thanking them for the time that they are spending and hopefully the wisdom that they're providing you. And another important point here is, I mentioned being giving, right? I think a lot of times people may feel a little intimidated by doing informational interviews or reluctant to do informational interviews because they feel like they're asking something of somebody, right? Which of course you're asking them for their advice, but they're also saying, they're also agreeing to do that. That's one thing to remember. The other important thing to remember, however, is that you bring a lot to the table as somebody, as an experienced worker, an experienced person in the marketplace. So don't ever forget to, number one, remember that, but number two, ask them how you can help them. Because you never know how you can help that individual out. As an example, I was doing an informational interview with a gentleman in the fundraising area of the University of Illinois, Chicago. We had a real nice informational interview. And at the end, I said, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And if I can help you in any way in the future, please let me know. And he said, well, Marty, you had mentioned that you had a career in advertising. I said, yes. And he goes, well, my daughter is graduating with a degree in advertising. Would you happen to have some contact names that she might be able to reach out to from a networking standpoint as she tries to land an entry-level job? I said, of course I do. So in my follow-up note, I included those names. His daughter actually did follow up with those names and actually got a job with one of them. So again, you never know how you can help somebody out. Something that's really, I think, important to remember just for your own sense of self-efficacy, your sense of confidence as you go through a job search. Be time conscious. As I mentioned, time is such a valuable commodity. If you've asked for 20 minutes, as you come up to that 20-minute marker, just say, it looks like we're almost out of time. They'll say, I've got another 10 minutes or I've scheduled the full hour. They will let you know, but just be cognizant of the time. Again, you want to be respectful of the time that they're taking out of their day to help you. And then importantly, be yourself. That's really important because, as I mentioned, if it's all about, if it's all about culture and fit potential, the only way that you're going to get there is by being yourself. You want to be able to find your next position in a place that you feel comfortable and that fits you well, so that hopefully you will be successful, that you can be there for a while. So, and the only way you're going to get there is by being yourself. So please remember that. And then, the last point is, and I don't want to sound Pollyanna-ish, if that's a word, about this, because I know how it can be when you're looking for a position, if you're in a job search, but you can have some fun with doing informational interviews. You learn about people, you learn about different companies. It's a great journey if you want to look at it that way. And you can learn some pretty cool things. I have a great anecdote to share, but sadly, for the interest of time, I won't be able to share it, but it all came out of doing the informational interviews and, knowing and learning about an individual and the organization that they worked in. So how do you conduct an informational interview? A suggested approach for phase 1 and phase 2. Remember, phase 1 was just exploring your opportunities. Phase 2 was about clarification and validation. Number 1, you want to start off with real quick recap of your background, introducing yourself. And then to get the conversation flowing, you want to ask them a little bit about their background, right? Most people like to talk a little bit about themselves, so it's a great way to get the conversation flowing. And then from there, you can start to ask your questions, right? If they haven't brought up any additional contact names for you, where to ask for that is towards the end of your informational interview. And the reason I say that is, remember, it's about establishing credibility, because when they give you a contact name to follow up with, what are they doing? Well, they're extending a piece of their own credibility, right? And they're not going to do that give that just to anybody. So you have to be able to establish your credibility first. And then more than likely, they'll say, hey, you need to go talk to Jim. He knows really a lot about this industry and can give you a great overview, right? But if it hasn't come up, then you can ask towards the end of the informational interview, would you happen to know of anyone else within this industry that may be able to help me learn more about it. And then they will say, yeah, Jim is a great person for you to go and talk to. Next step would be, again, to remember, ask how you can help them. You never know how you can help individuals out. And then, of course, thank them for taking time out of their day. Again, that's the basic approach that I used when it came to doing informational interviews in phase 1 or phase 2. Phase 3 is a little different. Remember, this is what I call strategic prospecting. Once you've figured out that you want to be in this industry, you've got your eye on a position at a specific company, perhaps. You've done enough networking to know that who the hiring managers are for the particular roles that you would be interested in. And you've been fortunate enough now to land an informational interview with that individual. How do you conduct that informational interview? Well, again, you start off very similarly, just a brief introduction, recap of your background, right? And then you can ask them a little bit about their needs. Typically, that'll be tied into whatever their position is, right? Because the assumption is at this point is, that this is the industry that you're interested in this company and this role. So you have a good understanding of what those needs are, right? And by asking about them, you know that their answers will be, generally speaking, in this realm. And then what you can start to do is link what you can do, what your skills and abilities are as benefits to answer what they just brought up as their needs. So, for instance, you might be talking to an individual who's a marketing manager for new products, and when you ask them a little bit about, what they've been doing, what they're up against, and we've been we've been having some success introducing our products, but have started to notice that there's some changes going on in the marketplace, and it's been a tough thing for us to figure out. You can start to say, well, I've got, in the background, when I worked in this area, we faced a similar sort of obstacle, and what we were able to do there was this, which could be perceived then as a benefit to that hiring manager, right? That informational interviewer, and they may find your answer interesting to them and keep you in the back of their mind for either when a position opens up, or who knows, they may have a project for you to work on, which has happened as well in the past in informational interviews. Then you can ask for any contact names, and traditionally what they will do is, because they'll know either people at similar levels within their company, or more than likely, they also know people within a similar level at other companies that they could recommend for you to go and speak with, which again is a great way to heighten your visibility within that industry. Again, ask how you can help them. You never know how that can work for you. And could, in this particular instance, lead to a side project. You never know. And then, of course, thank them out of their day. So you can see phase 2 is a little bit different because it starts to narrow in on the areas of something that it is that you'd like to do. And just a quick example of that, I had an informational interview with a person who was a director in a career office. And, I said, if I can help you in any way in the future, please let me know. And she said, well, we have a program for our students where they go off and do internships at companies. You were in a similar field, managing interns. Could you come in and do a presentation for them about what to expect at an internship and how to get the most out of their internship? Which I said, of course, I'd love to do that. So I was able to go and do that and help them out again. And I was able to show at that point, you know, what I could do on the job for them, right? My skills and abilities, which was a great way, again, to make the case about myself and what I could do in case they ever had a job that was open, or if they knew of a job that was open where maybe they could recommend me to. So that all comes out of a phase 3 type of informational interview. Some of the suggested questions, and again, this will be in the packet that Mike sends along. It's also obviously in the presentation if you want to access it at prezi.com. But you know, there's a number of different questions that you can ask. These are just some of them. You can go out and do your research on the internet and generate a whole number of questions that you can utilize effectively in informational interviewing. So then what happens after? Of course, make sure that you send a note thanking the individuals for taking time out of their day to do the informational interview. You can never say thank you enough. Make sure that you're following up on the leads, right? If a person gives you a contact name, what did I say before? They're extending a piece of their own credibility. You don't want to not follow up on those, right? You want to make sure that if they give you a contact name that you're following up because you want to continue to establish your credibility. And you never know where that lead may lead you. And then finally, I always asked if it's okay to provide occasional progress updates of it, if it makes sense. So, you know, I would follow up and say, thank you so much for the contact name. Susan was wonderful to speak with. Again, thank you so much. And I hope you don't mind if I provide an occasional update. And then also, one thing that I've been doing since I've been in the world of higher ed and completed my transition, actually, I still send out on an annual basis a progress update to those, not all 125 individuals that I talked with in informational interviewing, but a number of them, just to say, hey, you know, here's what happened to me in the past year. You know, thank you so much for the help that you provided in helping me transition into higher ed. It's been a wonderful fit for myself. If I can help you in any way in the future, please let me know. I can't tell you how many emails I'll get back from those individuals just thanking me for the updates, or, you know, saying, hey, can you help me out with this one thing, or whatever it might be, right? And I ran into one of those individuals at a conference, and she said, thank you so much for sending those updates. I really appreciate it. And the reason she said that was because it makes me feel like the time that I spent with you, the wisdom that I was able to share was helpful. So anyway, again, something I would highly recommend doing. Here's an example, just really brief, of a thank you note. You know, thanks so much for taking out of the time today to speak with me this morning. I really appreciate the advice and counsel that you provided. It will prove invaluable as I navigate my transition. As promised, the link to the social media presentation that I mentioned is here. This was actually a follow-up to an individual in the marketing area within higher ed. And as I mentioned, social media was still relatively new at this standpoint. And turns out somebody in my accountability group was a social media expert at the time and had just gotten done doing a presentation for us on it. So I was able to share that with that individual, which he found to be really helpful. By the way, this person is the same person who thought of me to recommend me for that open marketing position that I'd mentioned earlier. So again, you never know where things can lead. So I don't know, for those of you who may remember this, but it's the old Wella Balsam ad, right? And if you're doing informational interviewing, it will be similar to that, right? And they'll tell two friends, and they'll tell two friends. There were times when I walked out of an informational interview, and I got 5 or 6 contact names for me to follow up with. So I needed something to make sure that I kept on track. I mean, for me, I'm old school, as I mentioned. I would print out my outreach and then 3-hole punch them, put them in a 3-ring binder, and then write notes on it just to make sure I was following up the way I had to do it. Other people like to utilize Excel sheets, or you can go online now and use a customer relationship management tool, whatever you feel comfortable using. Just make sure that you're following up with the leads that you are being given. That's really important. Any more tips I can provide? I've mentioned some of these already along the way. Be proactive. You're in charge of this process. Never forget that. Be yourself. Also never forget that, because that's how you're going to be successful. If you are one of those people that are intimidated by doing an informational interview, practice interviewing on family and friends on a topic that you're really interested in before you start your outreach for informational interviews.
Marty?
And then the last point is, build rapport by looking and listening for things of interest. So if you happen to be doing it on Zoom and maybe you see something in the background that you're familiar with, and you're like, hey, I'm a White Sox fan too. Isn't it great, the possibilities the White Sox have this year of going all the way to the World Series and winning it all? Wouldn't that be awesome? That's the sort of thing that you can do to build rapport and get the conversation going. So a couple more slides, and then
Marty, real quick.
Yep.
Marty, one of the participants asked, do handwritten thank you notes have a greater or lesser impact?
Oh, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. That gets to the point of the art of informational interviewing. I certainly think handwritten notes are good, but one thing I will say is you run the risk of those getting lost in the mail, which you don't want to do. So my recommendation always is follow up with an email, as soon as you can, thanking them for the informational interview. And then if you'd like to follow up with a handwritten note as well, please do so, and you can drop that in the mail. But again, because the delay sometimes of something going through the mail or it getting lost in the mail, you don't want to not follow up with a thank you note and risk having your note getting lost in the mail. So what you have in front of you here is what some other people had to say, and I believe this blog is still out there from the New York Times, but I guess this would be the good way to do informational interviewing. The best way to make someone feel good about granting you an informational interview is to show you deserve the time. Do your homework, be passionate, be humble, and get out of there in under 30 minutes, no matter how well it's going. Leave letting them know 2 things: how appreciative you are, and that their advice is more than informational, right? It will help you get the job done. So if that's, hopefully the right way of doing informational interview, and remember, you're always out there establishing your credibility and your reputation. You always want to be professional, present yourself in the best possible way. So if that's the right way to do it, here's the not so right way to do it. My favorite was a friend of a friend of a friend who sent me a gushing email and a plea for information about how to get a job in international journalism. So I sat down, wrote a long, thoughtful email and reply, probably took half an hour, explaining how things worked. I didn't receive even a cursory acknowledgement that the email had been received, let alone a thank you. But about 4 or 5 months later, I got a request from that same person essentially asking that I sponsor him for a job in my news organization. Not happening. Again, this speaks to what I just mentioned. You're always out there establishing your credibility and building your brand. You want to be professional. That means You want to follow up. You want to be thankful to individuals for helping you along the way, and helping them wherever you can. Remember what I said. No matter what industry those of you on the call today are interested in, it's a small community. So you want good word of mouth being talked about you rather than the opposite. So with that, vielen Dank, grazie, thanks. And if I can help any of you in the future, please let me know. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions that we haven't already answered.
Marty, it's Jerry. Maybe talk a little bit more about introverts.
Sure.
And, this kind of informational interview. People that are very afraid of that.
Sure. What I've seen in talking with individuals, again, they feel intimidated about that thought of just reaching out to other folks to ask them for an informational interview, or when we're back to being able to be out and about at networking activities, those kind of activities are really intimidating to introverts. Because again, that thought of going out there and having to speak perhaps with individuals that they don't know can be scary. In an odd sort of way, this new environment could be a benefit, or I think it is a benefit for introverts, right? Because through LinkedIn or emails, doing an outreach is perhaps easier for an introvert, again, because it's that sense of control, right? They can take the time to craft their outreach on either a LinkedIn request or an email, which is a little different from if you're going out there and asking individuals to do it. So the recommendation that I have for introverts for this is just frame this in a way that makes you feel comfortable with it, which again is by being that you are in control of the situation. That's really important to remember. And the other thing is, if you are intimidated about doing that outreach, practice before you actually go ahead and do it. And then slowly work your way into it. And before you know it, you'll be doing it and you'll be really successful at it.
Marty, there's a couple questions in chat.
Sure.
One person asks, since people are so busy, isn't it better to ask for an informational interview in the second paragraph so they know why you're contacting them right away?
Typically, you don't want to ask right away, because if you do that, you may not even get the chance to establish your credibility. They may just shut down before they get there, which is why you want to be able to establish your credibility before you ask. If you remember back to my example, what I had mentioned was, this person had passed along your name as I helped manage my transition. And then you establish a little bit about yourself, and then you say that you're looking to conduct an informational interview with them, a brief one, to help you in managing that transition. So again, the critical element, though, is establishing that credibility. If you don't do that, the likelihood that they're going to say yes to your request is pretty low.
Someone asked, will these interviews be done over Zoom now?
Yes, I think, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the Zoom platform. It could be on Skype, on FaceTime, whatever it might be. One thing that I found while I was going through it was, I asked the interviewee however they wanted to do it. The best place to do it is if you can do it in person in their place of work. Obviously now with what's going on with the pandemic, you can't do that, right? But Zoom and similar platforms are really helpful because it does give you that added dimension, right, of seeing a person's face. You get to learn a little bit more about them. You get to see what's going on in the background, which, as I mentioned, allows you to pick up some signs maybe where you can build some rapport with those individuals. So clearly, right now, Zoom is a great way to do informational interviews. Telephones are still a great way to do informational interviews. at the moment. When we do get back to some sense of normalcy, the reason I highly recommend doing informational interviews in person is it's all about learning, right? And it's all about culture and fit potential. So if you can get the informational interview at that person's place of work, you visually are gaining a lot of information about what that culture is like, right? By showing up in their lobby 10 minutes early and just basically looking around and seeing how are the coworkers reacting to one another. Are they talking? What's the energy level? Is it really high? Is it low? What's the layout of the office space? All those cues give you a sense of what the culture of that organization is like, which again is really important in helping you make the best decision for yourself for whatever that next role might be. All right. Well, thank you so much to everybody for your time and your attention. As I mentioned, all these materials, Mike will be sending them to you. And you can also find them on prezi.com or my presentation on prezi.com. Or as mentioned earlier, this presentation will have been recorded and certainly you can view it again on YouTube. So yeah, and if I can help any of you in the future, please let me know.
Thanks, Marty. And just a reminder that next week at the same time, we'll have a program on interviewing. This is regular interviewing, not informational interviewing in the virtual age. So, you know, a lot of interviewing will be through Zoom. So some tips on doing that. So thank you, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And thank you, Marty.
Yes, have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.